I think I'm getting the start signal. Good morning. One more time. Good morning. All right. Welcome to Knox. My name is Gadikai Campbell, and I am the Provost and Dean of the College here. I have been here a little less than 4 months, and I've just been through my first homecoming, my first board meeting, my first start of the year's first year orientation, all that first stuff. And I am, because of my position, always asked to say a few words about Knox at many of these occasions. And I can't help but think to myself, y'all know I just got here, right? So, what I invariably say is that what I thought about the place from the outside has been confirmed just about every day that I've been here. And part of what has been affirmed is the importance of the arts in our curriculum. In many of those intros, I've shared a story from one of my favorite thought leaders in higher education, a guy by the name of Sir Ken Robinson. And he tells this story in one of his talks. He tells the story of a little girl who's sitting drawing, and the teacher comes over to the little girl and says, "What are you drawing?" And the little girl says, "I'm drawing God." The teacher says, "But no one knows what God looks like." The little girl responds, "They will in a minute." And he says that in part because he believes in a spirit of having a go. And he says that part of what happens with education is that we get that taken out of us. We get the idea that we ought to just have a go, the spirit of just having a go. Nina Simone was once pressed in an interview to define what it means to be free. And she begins by saying, "You can't describe it. It's like trying to describe what it means to be in love. You can't truly describe it, but you know it when you feel it." She said that there were a few times when she'd been on stage and felt truly free. And she stops and says, "I tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear. That's not all of it. It's like a new way of seeing." That is art. That is the power of the arts. And it is one of the reasons that we at Knox have a requirement for all students to engage in artistic creation. In the preface to that requirement, we say, "Artistic expression is universal to human experience, and creativity is essential to imagining and shaping the future." You are here at a place that believes deeply in the work that you do, a place that is pushing its students to use the arts to help them to be unconstrained in their thinking, to be truly free, to see things in different ways, and ultimately to shape the future. Knox welcomes you to its new Whitcomb Arts Building, its new Brazello Art Gallery, its new dance studio, and all the other spaces on this campus. We welcome your talent, your insight, and your fearlessness. And we hope you have a wonderful, wonderful time at this conference and on our campus. With that, I think I've been told to hand over to Josh and Claire, who apparently need no introduction. So thank you for being here.
Wow, that was really flattering. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to say welcome to Knox College, everyone, and thank you to everybody at Knox College, all of our partners, all of the volunteers. They've been wonderful. They've really opened their doors to us, so thank you. I think they deserve a round of applause. So this is actually going to be the last session where we are all together as a group. So I do challenge all of you to meet at least, 2 more people that you have not yet met. Make sure that you make that connection, and hopefully those are connections that you can take back to your own organization. After this, we will be heading over for lunch to, and let me make sure I've got it correctly, to the T. Fleming Fieldhouse. In your little map here that we've got in this booklet, that is number 16. You'll also notice that there's...
15.
I apologize, 15, thank you. Number 15. You'll also notice that there is chalk designs that'll help lead the way, so make sure you keep an eye out for that as well. When you get to the field house, it's a beautiful space. There's a lot of things happening in there. You will see quite a few tables around the space, and there will be organizations presenting different things, including the Alliance and the Arts Council, so please make sure you stop by and say hi. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Just, again, we really hope, we've had great feedback from you all already for the first day. Really hope you're going to enjoy and get the most out of your second day here with us. As Josh said, take advantage of those vendors. One of our sponsors, Blick Art Materials, has the opportunity for you to make stuff at the field house, so lots of fun creative expression possible there. And then I just found out actually also that one of our presenting artists this afternoon, William Estrada, is going to set up his mobile art cart, I believe, which I'm super excited about. So that's going to actually happen after his session at 1 o'clock, and it will be in between the union and the alumni hall. So where you got dropped off this morning, it'll basically be right around the corner / behind there, I think. Is that right, William-ish? Great, perfect. So we're thrilled to have that here too, and hope again that you can all take those ideas, those inspirations, those creative elements back. A couple other housekeeping things that I don't want to forget. There are no shuttles back to the hotels this afternoon. Those end at noon. But we will have shuttles between Knox College and downtown. It's not a terribly far walk, but if you're bringing luggage or if you're heavily laden or just don't feel like walking, there will be shuttles running between Knox and the Alumni Hall and then Mulberry Street, which is right by the train station. So you'll be able to get back and forth between those two venues this afternoon. The Alliance actually has at their table this afternoon, I was encouraged to mention, some table runners that Nick Cave, the extraordinary visual artist, designed for our luncheon last year that are absolutely beautiful. They're discounted for this audience only, so be sure to stop by and check those out as well. And again, we're just so delighted that you all made the trip. And thanks again to our Galesburg hosts for making this such a special conference. You'll be receiving a general survey from our organizations about sort of your whole experience. We also appreciate you taking the surveys at the individual events, so we have specific feedback on those. But you'll hear from us this week, not oppressively, but, but helpfully, so that we can help shape the next time that we're all together. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great rest of the conference. Oh, and let me introduce what's coming up next, which I'm really excited about. So on this panel for addressing race, identity, and immigration through art making, I'm actually going to let one of my dear friends, Gibran Villalobos, introduce the panel, but I'm just so delighted that Gibran came in from Mexico City at 2 a.m. this morning, took the train down, so cut him a little bit of a break if there's any over-caffeination happening. But Gibran's going to walk us through the work of these extraordinary artists and take us through some ideas around race, identity, and immigration. So turn it over to Gibran.
Handheld? We're good. Hi. That was my 2 a.m. energy. Thank you everybody for being here. Again, I'm super excited. Thank you, Claire. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. I actually can't think of a more pressing conversation to have at this moment than to talk about these topics. So I got a couple of notes for myself so that I do make up for my 2 a.m. welcome. So I want to remind you that we have somebody that's taking surveys. So do we have our survey taker in the back? Somewhere, raise your hand. No? So on the way out, there are surveys. Please fill those out so that you can evaluate and kind of give us some feedback on the conference. As Claire said, it's always really great to hear back your thoughts so that we know what to do in the upcoming years. But without any further delay, I want to welcome Kayem, who is the son of a Libyan revolutionary. Now, how's that for an intro? He's a Chicago-based hip-hop artist who has performed and headlined at the House of Blues, the Kennedy Center for the Arts, and the Manchester Academy in the UK. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're also joined by movement-based artist, attorney, musician, and writer, Jajah Wu. Jajah is the Deputy Program Director for the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights in Chicago and Houston. And unfortunately, we can't have Yvette Mayorga with us today, but Yvette is the stellar visual artist from Chicago who's, I'll talk about it in a little bit, we'll get some slides up. But she's an installation-based artist, interdisciplinary artist, who centers around the literal idea of candy and cake and sugar surrounding the American dream. Her work has been presented at the National Museum of Mexican Art, LACMA Pacific Standard Time, and Expo Chicago. So wherever you are, Yvette, here's a clap for you. So with that, I thought I would just get it started and have Jajah and Kayem talk to us about their work. Jajah?
Yeah, and I'm gonna, first, can everybody hear me? Is this good? All right, great. I'm gonna do a little bit of a reading because I failed to do a print out, so I have to stand up here. But it's actually nice because I'm so short that in that chair, my feet don't touch the ground. It makes me feel like a second grader. Don't like it so much. It's so wonderful to be here today. I have to admit, being here in Galesburg and seeing the level of energy, commitment, and artistry that you all in the audience are bringing to this wonderful event and that you will hopefully be able to share back in your home communities is very reinvigorating. I work at the Young Center as my quote-unquote day job, but what the Young Center does is, I think, very different than what I assume most of us are coming to this particular conference with. However, I think it's integrally related to the art and the work that you all are doing. If you don't know too much about the Young Center, I'm just going to give a quick introduction to what we do. So about 15 years ago, Young Center was created to provide what we call independent child advocates. These are like guardian ad litems to unaccompanied immigrant children who are held in federal custody around the United States, and we advocate for their best interests. And we remain the only group in the US appointed as child advocate for these particularly vulnerable kids. When kids make this very perilous journey to the United States, they're seeking safety, family, and a better life. It's very unfortunate that the moment that they are apprehended by our Customs and Border Patrol, they are reduced. They're reduced to a name, a number, a country of origin. And when they come before a judge who decides really what's going to happen to them for the rest of their lives, that's all a judge sees in their file. And when this happens, these children and their stories, their histories and narratives are stripped away from them. But the power of their stories is infinite, right? Stories give all of us shape. They set our course. They fix us in time and place, and they give us orientation in our histories and in our communities, in the very current of who we are. And for the kids that end up in immigration detention, facing deportation, away from their families and their communities, their story can really be the difference between being granted a life of safety and stability and one of fear and threat. The story can be the difference between their silence and their voice. And the role of the advocate is to help tell their story before a judge or decision maker. So it really isn't strange that this is where the work of an attorney or an advocate really starts to intersect with the work of the artist. The root of all humanity is nourished by stories. That's the fountain of it. That's where it comes from and grows from. And through these stories, we begin to learn about empathy and understanding. And we start to bridge this wide, seemingly wide gap between ourselves and the other. I'm going to read a short piece that I wrote in April of this year when the Department of Justice announced a new policy of prosecuting all the individuals found at the border, even if they came asking for protections like asylum. And this led to the separation of over 2,000 children from their parents so that the adults could be prosecuted in this way. 2,000. 2,000 is a terrible number, but it's also very academic. That's the nature of numbers, to be academic. So if we wanted to get closer to the truth, well, imagine reading 2,000 individual stories, stories of families, happy families, broken families, struggling families. There are birthdays, there are funerals, there are accidents and joys and losses. Maybe there are threats from gang members, maybe there aren't. In the story, a baby smears beans over her plate like a culinary Picasso. Her mother pats her cheek and makes the decision that is only easy because to decide otherwise is to die. They leave their home together for a place called America. And it's the summer of 2018. Ice cream and parades float like confetti across the United States. And in ways both terrible and mundane, the family finds themselves taken in at the US border. This baby still learning to eat, and her mother anxious to feed her. And in the borderland, strange men and women take this family apart, as efficiently as a farmer separates livestock. And the helpless fury of the mother and the terror of the child rise up into the frigid air of the Hilarias before they can hear each other no more. And the silence afterwards. Imagine that silence, where even though they beg, what next, what now, no one answers. And you read this story 2,000 times, and the circumstances change, but the ending does not. Maybe this gets us closer to the truth, the sound of 2,000 families drowning. Or maybe not. So here's another way. People don't believe it when I say that I remember my life as a 1-year-old in Shanghai, China, but I do. Because when I was 1, my father got a golden ticket. He got a visa to the United States for him, just one person. So he left, planning to stake out a life that would be deemed important enough by the United States so that the INS might decide it was worth granting my mother and me visas too. And when he called back home, I insisted that he was only talking to me in English and I couldn't understand him, and I refused to talk to him. When I was 2, my mother got her visa to join him. My aunt took me out of the house, telling me we were going to go to the park, so I wouldn't have to see her leave. But she didn't have to do that because I knew my mother was leaving, and I didn't really want to say goodbye. Years later, after we were all back together, one big, sometimes happy, immigrant family, I would still wake up with nightmares, with tears running down my face, as scared and mindless as rabbits from some dream scenario where my mother left me again and again. This is a little self-indulgent, but I'm trying to tell you that I am not completely healed from this separation that happened more than 3 decades ago. The separation that our family agreed to and planned on, as hard as it was. So how do I make people understand? How do I make you understand? I tell you, I give you my story. Immigrants are the borderland. We are the hyphenated American. We're not really here and we're not quite there. When I rode the Amtrak in, I was reminded again of the story of when first people started riding on trains and using the rail. They were in shock because of how quickly they were moving. And they were going so fast they would have to make stops to wait for their souls to catch up, which I think is very poetic and very beautiful. So for those of us who journey to America, we also leave part of our souls behind, somewhere along the path, over the Pacific Ocean, somewhere along the Rio Grande. We fill the empty space with what we find here in America. We make old food with new ingredients. We sing old songs with new instruments. We make new stories from the old. And we make America the borderland, and we become America. Thank you.
Thank you, Jajah. That was amazing. Next, can we bring up the images for Yvette? That'd be possible? And I'll briefly cover her work, if we can get the slides.
Oh, yeah, there's a...
Oh, there we go. Oh, thanks. So Yvette Mayorga is an interdisciplinary artist. I'm a huge fan of her work. And if I can guide you through some of her imagery, she uses cake, candy, frosting, sugary sweet smells as a form of insulation that in the gallery, in the room, really open up the senses to that overpowering sugary smell. And at the center of her practice is the idea of the American dream. So for her, she places the body at the center of these installations to form an altar, very likely connected to Day of the Dead with Mexicans, but also in other countries, just remembering those people that have passed away or are no longer with us. So in her sculpture, she really focuses on the fact that each one of these individuals is really there. Maybe not here with us anymore, but their presence is certainly available to us through the smells of what they left behind. Along with this, the idea of industrialism and hyper-capitalism, the excess of sugar and candy really is part of what makes her installations so rich, vivid, and overwhelming at times. I've seen her work and just actually been swimming in some of this frosting before. At the Museum of Contemporary Art, she did a phenomenal piece where she brought frosting, buckets of frosting for kids to draw on the museum walls. But also what was really impressive about this was that parents were really overwhelmed to see their kids draw with frosting, one, not care about the cleanup, but two, to have that intergenerational moment, which, again, I think is sometimes really at the core of what these migratory stories really bring to us. So this is not a fair substitute to what Yvette could have said to us, but I did not want to pass up the opportunity to show you her work, which I think some of the themes will be resonant in the conversation that we have. So hang on, there's still another treat at the very end, but first I want to pass it off to Kayem and we'll continue the conversation.
Hey everybody, how you guys feeling today? See a couple familiar faces. I met some of y'all last night. First of all, I want to say thanks to Galesburg, man. It's such a dope town. I've never been here before. And the Arts Alliance and Knox College, amazing hosts. I wish I got here earlier yesterday. And prayers and positivity to Yvette. I wish she could join us. I don't really have a presentation. They asked me about slides and visuals. I'll probably just talk a little bit about what I do and what my background is, if that's cool. I go by the name Kayem. As Gibran said, my father was a revolutionary in Libya. He was a political prisoner there. He escaped prison after 5 years and lived on the run for a long time and helped form a pro-democracy movement that was based in and around North Africa, like in Sudan, Chad, Algeria for a while. And they were, in the 80s, actively trying to overthrow the regime there. They're facing a lot of assassinations and turbulence, so they left Africa and came to the United States, which they thought would be safer. And they all collectively moved together and wanted to pick a nice town. And so I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, in a community of Libyan political dissidents. Which is really, it was cool. And you know, I really like now, I talk about my story a lot, not people tell me or when I do interviews, like your story is so cool and unique, but I really didn't know that growing up because my friends also had fake last names or didn't have baby photos because their parents had to leave right now, they're coming, you know. So I think a lot of my work, I'm a hip hop artist, I dabble in film, I do workshops. A lot of my work deals with identity, especially for anybody that's part of the diaspora, and kind of understanding our place. I used to go by the name Khalid M. I had a decent career, was touring, traveling full-time, and then in 2013, starting Labor Day, I was detained at the border of Canada and Michigan, and I was put on the no-fly list after that. Couldn't travel anymore. I was given Quad S status, which stands for a secondary security selectee status. It's like a designation for people deemed a potential threat to national security. And basically like everything career-wise was on halt. Like lawyers' orders, you can't be on Twitter, you can't perform, you can't do anything. We had a lawsuit against the government basically challenging the constitutionality because with these lists, there are no charges or like accusations at all. So even if you're accused of murder, you can say, hey, this is what they think I did. I can prove that I didn't do that. But when you're just placed on a list that casts a wide net, you can't really prove your innocence. So it took 3.5 years, but we did win that case. So I've been back performing. Thanks. It wasn't one of those lawsuits where you got money, you know what I mean? So I didn't get any money out of the deal. But it was a strenuous few years. I mean, it's perpetual harassment, surveillance, detainments, like over and over. We had to deal with different tactics that are extremely dehumanizing. But so I've been back for 1.5 years under the name Kayem. My first show back was headlining a showcase at South by Southwest that was called Contraband, and it featured artists from all the banned countries on Trump's list: Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Libya. And so I've been touring for 1.5 years pretty consistently, making music, but I've yet to release any new music. November 13th is the target date, so it's a good like timing for me to be here. I guess there's a lot of things going on, and I'm really excited. And other than the music, I dabble in film. I had a fellowship last year at Tribeca Film Institute. I help them now kind of find filmmakers from marginalized communities and get grants for their films. There's probably a few filmmakers in here. Holler at me. If you are just a plain white person, you might have to wait at the back of the line. You know, but just partner up with somebody. Just joking, and that's cool. And then my first trip ever to Libya, we filmed a documentary. I didn't film it, I can't take credit, but I was the subject of a documentary. We had a film crew of 9 people that followed me and captured my whole journey home to this place that we had been exiled in. And we always had a strong connection to home. We didn't come, as a lot of other immigrants come, for economic opportunities or educational opportunities. We always came here thinking we're going back, you know. So my parents would have never thought I'd make it to my 20s and still be living here. Like, we always thought next year when the situation changes. My father passed away when I was younger. So the documentary was cool because I think it gave me a different experience going home than I would have had on my own, because the director would tell us, how about you take your uncle to this place or have this conversation? And I got to learn a lot about my family in a way that I may not have if I went on my own. I went to, obviously, like meeting my family for the first time. We went to the mountains where my father, after he escaped jail, hid, and he carved his name and date into the side of the mountain. I got to see that. And just a lot of beautiful moments. And we're releasing that December 6th, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm happy to be here. Semi-embarrassed to be on the stage because there's so many phenomenal people here. I was stalking the presenters list, and like anybody could be up here. I don't know why we're up here. But I really, appreciate y'all's time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you, too, for really wonderful, impressive, and amazing stories. I think, the storytelling aspect is something that always captivates me, right? My background is in visual art, but seeing these images in my head is such a powerful impact. And, bringing in Yvette into the room, I'm inspired to ask, Yvette's work has, frosting and cakes and things that are familiar to us, right? Sugary sweets that we can really feel are really resonant with our mind, right? And then the quinceañera drawings and the quinceañera parties, and then things that we're visually familiar with, like the immigration and borders and all these other lines. How do you talk to people and invite people who are not familiar with these images? Or maybe even worse, people who think that identity or race doesn't affect them. How do you invite them into your conversations? Speaking about, plain white people.
I think more than anything, initially, it's, especially if you come from a background that you feel is underrepresented, the most important thing for us is just to exist. There is no monolith, and no one person can speak on behalf of a whole subset of people. So even within that, Africans, Libyans, Muslims, Arabs, Kentuckians, they all exist on a spectrum, And I have love for every one of those things, but I'm not the representative. But I think what we can do is always share our stories and share them honestly. I know with me and my art, Jerry Bruckheimer, he's like this big movie producer. He once said something to the effect of, like if somebody comes and watches my movie and for 2 hours they forget about all the problems in their world, then mission accomplished. And for me, and I feel like a lot of the people in the room are similar, I want to do the opposite. I don't really want my art to serve as a distraction. I want to talk about the adversity and the pain and the trauma and come out together at the end, unified and feeling a bond. So I really think initially the most important thing is to just exist and to exist loudly. And the more that people are exposed to other ways of thinking, especially through the arts, I think the more that stuff can change. Riza Aslan is a pretty notable religious scholar, and all he does is have academic debates all day. And he himself was like, things aren't going to change with scholars debating academia. Things really change with entertainment in people's households and the way that art is perceived. So honestly, I think the most important thing is to exist and to never make the conversation a unilateral conversation, and to just insert yourself as a part of it and also hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that's spot on. There's a lot, I think, that folks as artists and advocates can do to move the conversations forward. I think just by creating art as somebody who comes from a marginalized community is incredible, right? It's something that is what, and I think this gets back to Yvette's work. Like it appears, art is often seen wrongly, I think, as frivolous, right? It's this thing, and it's the extra that you do, and you have to take care of all these other life things first, and then you do that. But I think, especially for minorities and for folks from marginalized communities, making art is so important because it is it's the beginning, right? It's the beginning of telling that story, and it opens up possibilities to continue the conversation with people who may not understand where you're coming from or what your struggles have been. It's a wonderful way to very gently press somebody, and art is always a question mark, right? Art is built not by what it is, but by this connection between the audience and the work. And so if you can just get this in front of someone who's not used to thinking about race, identity, immigration, that immediately sets off a spark. And I think our role as artists and advocates is to use those creations to say, okay, let's have a conversation now. Let's get to the root of why this is sparking the question.
In a way, I think what you're pointing to is that at the end of the story, to use that metaphor, we have almost like storytelling as policy. And I think oftentimes we don't think of that to say, like, the frivolous part of the art doesn't end there. It doesn't end with just the joy of the narrative. It actually ends with what happens afterwards. How does the policy get enacted? How does it enact change? And I want, yeah, that is definitely an entry point, much like the sugary sweets.
Yeah, and I just have to say, working in a world with immigration judges, with, senators and lawmakers, they respond to numbers sometimes, but they really respond to stories. And I think this idea of like changing people's image of immigration, of race, through art, through entertainment, that definitely bleeds in and affects all of us on a much bigger scale, because these folks are not immune to public art, to public opinion, to what's out there in the entertainment world. So very much so, it all eventually rides into this idea of where are we piloting this nation?
Thank you for that. I sort of want to be self-indulgent here and read a quote from one of my favorite authors. Her name is Lauren Berlant, and it's one of my absolute favorite books called Cruel Optimism. So I don't mean to get all professor about this, but again, can't remember from 2 a.m. But I want to read this quote and see, it's going to be the tough question, and I think I've already prepared you for it. But she says, "Cruel optimism exists when something you desire is actually an obstacle in your flourishing. It might involve food or a kind of love. It might be a fantasy of the good life or a political project. It might be as simple as a new habit that promises to induce you in an improved way of life. These things become cruel only when what draws you to them actually ends up working against you." And that's the end of the quote. To me, that starts sounding a lot like the American dream. And Kayem, in one of your songs, Lights Out, you talk about the American dream. So the tough question for me, also as a kid from immigrant parents, is where do you place your work within that American dream? Are you dismantling the myth that draws immigrants to the American dream? Are you enabling it? What are your thoughts? It's a tough one.
For me first?
Either way.
You don't want to go first, Jajah?
He mentioned you in the question.
Honestly, you say you prepared me, but you just kind of mentioned it in passing. I was like, wow, that's a great question. I would say this, majority of us who live here in America, in the United States of America, people outside of America hate when you refer to it as America, by the way. But majority of us who live here in the United States are here because we think there's something working, right? There is some, despite whatever we call out, there's something working, and there's the potential for good to be here. And there are subsets of people that get upset when you complain about anything going on and say, well, why don't you go back here or back there? You've got it better here. Well, I think part of the point of having the United States is we bill ourselves of the innovators of social justice and human rights, whether we've lived that truth or not. I think that's how we see ourselves and how we want to be, so we're aware of that. So more to your point, I think it's more about an American dream, maybe not the American dream. Maybe people's American dreams are different. People who live here are probably here because they see some value in that. And man, I don't know. It's, I can say, like, I feel like we live in such a polarized time right now. And people kind of just have their team that they bat for, and they're gonna ride with that team, and that's the conclusion, and that's that. And I feel like art is one of the best ways to kind of get people's defenses down and really understand each other on a more intimate level, without talking about policy and candidates and this and that, you know. Regardless of what governments do, people can always connect on a social level, you know. The United States, within here and let's say Iran, right? Iran and the United States government could be at odds, but you may meet somebody here who's visiting from Iran and get along great. Like whatever the governments are doing really have no bearing on you. And I think that matters here as well. Like as citizens, like we can connect and build and have dialogue. And you know, for me, an American dream is just for everybody to be served equally, not to be, you know, I come from a place in Chicago where there's, many of you are from, there's food deserts, there's just desolate areas, there's really a disproportionate distribution of institutions that provide services to communities. And I think, you know, for me, an American dream is acknowledging that, you know, becoming aware of that, and being empowered to actively fight against that and provide something different.
What was the question again?
Are you the American dream?
No, I think in a lot of ways, when you start working with immigrant communities, a lot of what you're seeing are very broken versions of the American dream, right? People come here with one expectation, and things are difficult. I think things are very, very hard for immigrant families, you know, to come into this new world that's very different. And the moment, you know, if you're a family and you land with a kid, that child very quickly starts integrating and assimilating, and that can cause a rift within the family as well. But I think, you know, what is important to dismantle, putting that aside for a second, is the idea that America, you know, belongs to anybody. America should belong to everybody. And right now, I think we've lived for many decades in this cocoon of thinking, oh, but, you know, we've conquered those things and we're fair now, and, you know, we got rid of segregation. And I think if there's a silver lining to what's happened in the past couple of years, it's that a lot of the very trenchant and hidden segregations and inequities that many of us working in the arts and coming from these communities have known all along, they're really coming to the fore. And I think it's this that we have to dismantle, this idea that we had a perfect America or that America ever had a golden age. No, absolutely not. I think this idea right now, what I'm seeing with a lot of folks is that they're scared that their piece of the pie is getting smaller, and and it's natural, right? Like, you don't want your pie to be less, you want more pie. But they don't understand that if you invite folks in, they can help make the pie. You can have more pie, it'll be better pie, it'll be pie with different spices in it, right? Like, I think it's a good metaphor as we're going into lunch. But, but I think that idea of dismantling and building, to put a little bit more of an optimistic spin on it, I would like to dismantle the American dream and replace it with a conversation about where we could go.
I'd like to add to, when we're talking about the American dream in relation to immigration and refugees specifically, that also that group of people is not a monolith. And not everybody here is coming because they dreamt of America. A lot of people are here because they had a nightmare of where they're from, you know? And, you know, there's, like, we think of refugees as these people that need a handout. Refugees are literally just people who could not live where they lived. They could be doctors, they could be lawyers, they could be singers. I mean, I went on tour with the singer Lubana, who's a world-renowned, who Ronnie's on tour with right now, Tommy knows, and she's a phenomenal opera singer. She's famous back home, and she's here with me doing these rinky-dink shows around America. And it wasn't her dream to come to America and do that. She was set, she was good. She couldn't live in Syria anymore, you know. And I think we have this arrogance about how good we have it and how much we have to offer. Not everybody is here because they, you know, they have an American dream. Lubana probably has a Syrian dream and would have loved to live that, but it just wasn't reality for her. So, you know, I just think we should always be conscious of that. Not every immigrant that comes here is somebody that's just been dreaming of it. And that's the case for some people too. But some people simply just couldn't live where they were living. They have lots to contribute. They're smarter than us, more talented than us, speak more languages than us, cook better food than us. And this pie is going to be a damn good pie, and it's not going to be lacking in spices or salt if we invite them in.
What I appreciate about this conversation is that it leaves us really unsettled with an idea of what could it be, what's the potential for that, right? So I'm going to play Geraldo now and kind of go out into the audience and what are your questions? What's your part of the pie here? So if anybody has a question, we have a few minutes before we have a stellar end to this talk. Do I see any questions out in the audience? Back here, I'll come out to you.
So in this whole two-day conference, we're in a lot of ways kind of speaking to the choir here. I mean, I think we're all here because we believe art can change things and we think it can open conversation. So I guess my question is how much work do you as an artist do, or the visual artist as well, to actually engage people that are on the other side of the aisle? And when you're doing that, if you're doing that at all, how does that not just become pushing a liberal agenda? How are you able to kind of open those conversations and not just preach to the choir overall?
Could you tell me also your name and who you're with? Because there's a lot of cool people in the room.
Sure. My name is Christina Salerno. I was a classical ballet dancer, and I now work for Illinois Philharmonic Orchestra.
Nice, thank you. I think that's a very, very good question. And I think with art, some things can be overt, like that South by Southwest show I said, my name is called Contraband, and it's really in your face. But in a lot of spaces, for someone like me, it's important to just exist. I don't even have to talk about politics, what I do. For a lot of people, just meeting somebody in person, let's say who's a Muslim, for example, when you look at poll numbers of Americans and their views on Muslims, the percentage of people who have Muslim neighbors or friends or coworkers' views are very, very different than those who have never met a Muslim or a gay person or a black person. You know, your views are always going to be different. So I know for me, like I said, existing is really important. And representing, I do always definitely feel like I'm on my P's and Q's. Like, you know, a lot of people here, you know, like if I'm at a restaurant and I have a horrible service, I still got to leave a really good tip because I know I'm like tipping on behalf of everybody.
Everybody,
you know,
every brown
like,
person.
you know, I know that experience with me is going to live. But I think it's important not to only be in our bubbles and like to get out there and move around. And for me, like there's always something that can expose people to something else, you know. And just because people are liberal or progressive doesn't mean they know it all or have experienced it all. And I see that a lot here in the States. I just had a conversation with somebody last night and I was talking about, you know, if you watch the news in America, for example, we think that CNN and Fox News are so different from one another. But somebody coming from overseas, if somebody was to come from Libya and watch, they think they're the same. Fox News is like, look at this Muslim, he's a terrorist and he's violent. And then CNN will be like, well, this Muslim doesn't really practice and he drinks and goes out, so he's not that bad. When they're both kind of just reaffirming that agenda that like your average, everyday practicing Muslim is a threat or scary, you know? So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. I don't think anybody should be content in their knowledge or experience with people. And you have to be really intentional about the spaces that you get into. I mean, that is a beautiful point that you brought up, and we don't want to always just kind of be preaching to the choir. But that's why many of us as artists can just subtly be sneaky and just make the art, and people like that, and they're like, oh crap, I just learned something, you know? And right now's the time. Right now with technology and online, people are empowered. There's fewer gatekeepers in entertainment. I mean, we're just now getting to a point where Black Americans are being able to create, not just star, like we're not happy to just be featured in this or star in this, but to create a movie like Get Out or a show like Atlanta. And if you watch a show like Atlanta, for example, it's not always going to be in your face, subversive, I'm making this point, that point. It's just existing. It's showing people from a subset that exists on a spectrum, and people are at home watching and getting educated without feeling like they're being educated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I don't think anything's going to happen overnight, and nor should it. I think it's got to be slow, and it has to be through always pushing the conversation forward in this broad way. But also I think a lot of folks here are you know, they are white, normal, what did you say? White,
I don't know, normal
white people.
Normal.
But if you are, you know, Caucasian and cis and hetero, you know, you're an ally to all of this. I think it's really hard for minorities and for people who come from difficult backgrounds to always, like, existing is hard, right? Existing in white spaces is hard, and existing in America can be hard. And so to have allies who kind of push the conversation without pushing, I mean, I don't think it's I mean, if there's a label to it, if you want to call it liberal, I mean, that's fine. But what you're saying is I'm showing you the humanity that exists in other people, and I'm asking you that you recognize for them what you have for yourself. That doesn't appear to be, I mean, I understand it's political in this particular climate, but it really shouldn't be. I mean, that's just, that seems like a very human thing to do, and to me, it's wonderful to have allies who will support us and strengthen that conversation when I think it's time for us to sit back and just say, you know, I got to take a minute, because like you said, it's hard. It's hard to be.
I will add to that. I'm sorry, I don't want to spend too much time on one question. It's a great question. We should also never get too comfortable or confident in our place of knowledge relative to others. Sometimes we look down on somebody because they voted for somebody else. And if you look at big picture, maybe we don't support this local politician that we think is so oppressive, but we have no problem with this person overseas that does ABC. And speaking from my personal experience, I've been in Chicago my adult life, 10 years. I still have family in Kentucky. I go back there. And people are always like, Kentucky, you know, blah, 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 blah. And in a lot of ways, Kentucky is a lot more progressive than Chicago. You know, our current mayor is an openly gay man. He's been mayor for 8 years. The mayor before that in Lexington was an Arab-American woman. But the thing that I appreciate when I do go to Kentucky is everybody wears their feelings on their sleeve. So it's easy to have honest conversations, and people are really fickle. For example, I was going hiking at a place called Red River Gorge. Car broke down. I was with a big group of people, many of whom were Muslim women who had head coverings. We were in Clay County, Kentucky. These are parts of Kentucky. When they're going by the county name, you know you're in the boonies. Like, you're not, you know, there's no cities. It's just Clay County. Flat tire, I pull in, it's a Sunday. In this part of Kentucky, everything's closed on Sundays. I don't have the part for the van. I'm like, what am I gonna do? And this biker gang pulls up, literally like Sons of Anarchy looking gang. I'm like, I guess these are who I have to ask. Excuse me, can you guys come help us out? And as they're helping me out and being extremely polite and cordial, I'm reading the patches on their uniform, and one of them is the shape of America, and it says, we're full, get out. And the other one says, like, speak English or get the F out. And I guarantee this is probably the first time these people have ever had an experience with brown people of any kind. They weren't able to help us. They called some other ladies who came and called their father who came, and eventually after like 4 hours we got it done. But they had a pleasant experience, and a lot of people may literally be bigoted literally out of ignorance and lack of exposure and not out of hate. Whereas I could be in Chicago and somebody could be on the board of diversity for Northwestern University, and if you get a flat tire, he just beeps at you and flicks you off like, get out the way, you know? So, you know,
Very specific.
yeah, I'm just, you know, we should always just kind of be humble in our place of how informed we think we are and how pleasant we think we are, and just remember that there's room for everybody at the table.
You know, shameless plug for the Museum of Contemporary Art. So one of the spaces that I manage is called the MCA Commons. And to kind of speak to your question, one of the things that I've been trying to develop in that space is keeping it as one of the few remaining spaces that are really open to the public. And what I mean by that is that if we look at the spaces that we can go out and be in public without having to buy a beer, without having to buy coffee, this might be one of those last free spaces. Then we're trying to keep it free, and I am trying to keep it free and open, and never will you be asked why you're there, so that you maybe do encounter some disagreement. And I think that there is a lot of value in that disagreement with somebody to just exist in that same space. Cohabitating is also, it's a tough part. I think we have time for one, no, we don't have time for one more question, but we have a sweet, sweet end. Kayem is going to be performing for us. Kayem, do you have the name of your piece? And he's going to be doing it a cappella. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Hi. My name is Kayem. This is Kayem if you're on social media, Kayem. I'm not going to lie, with your permission, I wasn't a super fan of, just as an artist, the sound. But is it cool if I just do some acapellas? Okay, cool. I'm not like a dancer or anything, so it's all good. So first piece, a quick verse. Like I said, I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. A little bit of different upbringing in a group of political dissidents, so this is about that. I didn't grow up imagining myself on the cover of a magazine. If I ever had a dream, it was my people just overcoming the bad regime. I wondering what would my dad be seeing. See, a part of me wasn't sure if he had really died. Some sort of silly pride, it's hard to sum up how I would feel inside. I knew that they told us the truth when they said Pac died. I learned not to hold that hope after my pops died. It's ironic, I never dreamt about being a rapper, celebrity, or being iconic. I was content with my Sega, just playing my Sonic. Understand, I came from pain and the torture. I can never dream about the fame and the fortune. I was just happy I wasn't named the abortion. But now that I'm here, I'm proud that I'm here. No need for standing ovations, don't get up out of your chairs. Yeah. Cool. Cool. And then I'll do one more short piece. It's from a song called Cloud Conversations. It's just about adversity, and it's metaphorical. The clouds, rain, you know, whatever. I talk to the clouds in the gray sky, trying to persuade them to let me stay dry. Cause I know when it rains, it pours, you get to solving all them problems in the brain of yours. The raindrops start to huddle, and then they form a puddle. It's starting out real subtle, but next thing you know, it's trouble. Now, you got a full-blown storm on your hands, but you come out at the end as more of a man. And once you feel the pain grow, be patient, then you'll see the rainbow. And that's what I told one fella, when it rains hard, faith is my umbrella, stand under mine. When the sun don't shine and the thunder cries, and you wonder why that this life don't treat you fair. But God don't place a burden on us more than we can bear. So I done laughed at pain more than one time. After rain comes the sunshine, and I done faced my fears and tasted tears, but those ain't wasted years. So the combination of confrontation and complication leads to congregations of condensation, which makes rain. The conservation of compensations of paper chase to be like the stars, so constellations could take blame. Follow the law, I follow a law, and then I hear the advan and I follow the call. You think you cursed to be worse than any person immersed in perversity? Your purpose be to personally overcome the adversity. So rise up. It's your moment to climb, it's your moment to shine, it's your moment to shine, so every person here should persevere when you see them dark gray clouds first appear. Thank you. I think this is it. I did have some housekeeping. Whenever I talk about oppression and overcoming injustices, I think about lunch, so get around. I think you make a right out this door and come down 2 rights, Fleming Fieldhouse. I've got some little cards. I'd love to connect with more people. I wasn't here until yesterday evening. On the table outside, there's little cards with like connections. If you come from an institution that has money to give, there's press kits out there. Take that, read it, and thank you guys.
Just carry that.